For 3,000 years, one star anchored Egypt's floods, harvests, calendar, and gods. Then, across a few centuries, that star vanished from the sacred record. No war triggered it, no pharaoh ordered it. The star is still there. It rises every July over the Nile Delta, burning white-blue just before dawn, exactly as it always has. The civilization simply stopped watching. That is the question this history answers. Every year Sirius vanishes below the horizon, swallowed by the sun's glare, invisible across Egypt for 70 days. Then in mid-July, it claws back above the eastern horizon before dawn. That reappearance detonated the agricultural year. Within days, the Nile flooded. Gray, cracked earth turned silt black and wet. Millions measured their survival against that single moment. Priests at Memphis and Heliopolis recorded none of this as astronomy. They recorded it as resurrection. The star died. It returned. The Nile obeyed. No other celestial event carried that operational weight. Not the solstice, not the moon. One star, one flood, 1 year. The Egyptians did not classify Sirius as an astronomical object. They named her Sopdet, a goddess, depicted with a 5-pointed star crown mirroring the star's piercing white light. She heralded the inundation, anchored the new year, and dictated the agricultural calendar. Every Egyptian farmer's survival ran on her timetable. Her consort was Sa, the constellation Orion. He climbed the eastern horizon before dawn each year, and Sopdet followed close behind. Their simultaneous return to the sky was not metaphor. It was a state event, witnessed from the Nile's banks by a civilization that organized its survival around that single moment. Sothic was structural, encoded in stone, in law, in every harvest and tax cycle the state ran. The Egyptian calendar ran on 365 days, 12 months of 30 days each, plus 5 festival days attached to the end. Elegant in structure, but fractionally wrong. The true solar year runs 365.25 days, and that quarter day slipped past uncorrected every single year. 1 full day of drift every 4 years. Over decades the calendar and the sky pulled apart. Quietly, invisibly, relentlessly. After 1,461 Egyptian civil years, the drift completed a full cycle. The heliacal rising of Sirius realigned with New Year's Day, a reset built from accumulated error. The Egyptians tracked it. They called it the Sothic cycle, 1,261 years of drift, then 1 moment of alignment, a clock longer than Rome's entire existence, keyed to 1 star. The alignment of these temples was not an accident of geography, it was precision built into the stone itself. Several Egyptian temples were oriented toward Sirius. The Isis temple at Dendera, the temple at Philae, and a Horus temple at Thebes all show proposed alignments keyed to Sirius's heliacal rising. The architects pointed their sanctuaries at the exact point on the horizon where Sopdet reappeared each July. That orientation was deliberate. The star's return didn't just mark the calendar. It was built into the stone's facing angle, encoding the Sothic cycle in the temple's very geometry. At Philae, the temple of Isis was oriented toward the southeast. Researchers have noted that its axis points in the general direction of Sirius's heliacal rising. The priests did not walk outside to watch Sopdet appear. They built the architecture so the star came to them. Sopdet came to them. The temple itself was a receiver calibrated across generations to one specific point in the sky. The oldest religious texts in human history were carved into stone burial chambers around 2400 BCE, cut directly into the granite of 5th and 6th dynasty pharaoh tombs. The pyramid text names Sopdet, the star Sirius, repeatedly. She appears not as decoration, not as a minor deity, but as a fixed coordinate in the map of death. The pyramid texts refer to Orion and Sirius together in the context of royal ascent. The dead pharaoh does not rise toward the sun. He rises into the stars, joining Sa, the constellation Orion, with Sopdet following close behind exactly as she followed in the living sky each year. Death replicated the annual celestial pattern, the same sequence that marked the flood, the harvest, the new year. It mapped onto the afterlife. The earliest Egyptian afterlife was not subterranean, not solar. It was a stellar address. The dead king traveled upward. To the stars tracked every dawn from the banks of the Nile. Sopdet was the destination. Not a symbol. Not a metaphor. The star itself was where the pharaoh was going. Egypt's oldest surviving text pointed straight at Sirius. During the 5th dynasty, 2494 to 2345 BCE, Egypt's pantheon shifted toward a different celestial body entirely. Ra's cult center at Heliopolis became Egypt's most politically potent religious site. Pharaohs stopped calling themselves sons of Horus. They became sons of Ra. Sun temples, sanctuaries built exclusively for Ra, appeared across Egypt during this dynasty, channeling solar light through stone corridors. The 5th dynasty pharaohs poured Egypt's resources into solar construction, pulling investment from the pyramid complexes that define the dynasties before them. Sopdet had not been defeated. She was being surrounded. Star-based architecture quietly giving ground to a god whose power rose every morning. Ra's dominance was operational logic. A star-based religion calibrates times, but it cannot command the working day. The sun governed every harvest cycle, every shadow on a sundial. Its authority stretched from the first light to the last. A pharaoh who called himself the son of Ra claimed descent from a force that never faltered, a god whose power rose every single morning without fail. Sopdet vanished from the sky for 70 days each year. Ra did not. That was the political logic embedded in the title. The sun was relentless, unbroken. A stellar goddess who disappeared for 10 weeks could not make the same claim. Sirius rose once a year. The sun rose every morning. Power follows the more reliable miracle, and every dynasty after the 5th knew it. The Egyptians did not erase Sopdet. They absorbed her, which is a more permanent kind of ending. Sopdet was syncretized with Isis, the most widely venerated goddess in the Egyptian world. The identification required almost no force. Isis wept for Osiris. Her tears, Egyptians believed, caused the Nile to flood. The stars rising became the goddess's grief made visible. An inscription at the Temple of Dendera states it plainly: Isis in the heavens. Sopdet is her name. The star survived, rehoused inside a story the civilization already believed. The star's power survived, but Sopdet's independent identity, her own cult, her own rising, dissolved. Absorption erased her. Earth doesn't spin on a fixed axis. It wobbles. A slow, continuous lean tracing a wide circle through the sky over tens of thousands of years. That wobble is measurable. It shifts which stars sit closest to the celestial pole. It shifts which stars rise heliacally with which seasons. Across millennia, the entire stellar backdrop drifts against the calendar. Axial precession shifts which stars rise at which times, not in a lifetime, but across centuries of drift. Around 3000 Tas BCE, the heliacal rising of Sirius and the Nile flood matched with eerie precision. Priests watched the star climb above the horizon. The river answered. By 1000 BCE, centuries of precession had been quietly shifting that alignment. The star still rose each July. The flood still came. But the tight correspondence that made Sirius feel like a direct command from the sky, that precision had been eroding year by year across generations, not broken in a single reign, worn down across dynasties. 1,000 years of planetary wobble had dismantled the celestial clock a civilization built its existence around. The Earth had drifted, Sirius had not. Axial precession works slowly, relentlessly, rotating Earth's polar axis across a 26,000-year cycle. Constellations that once rose at precise seasonal moments drift, degree by degree, until the sky map the priests recorded no longer matches the sky above them. Axial precession pulled the star's calendar off its anchor. The rising that once preceded the flood now arrived out of sequence, sometimes early, sometimes irrelevant. Priests built entire temple calendars around her reappearance. Every ritual, every planting window, every tax cycle hinged on Sopdet, a goddess whose authority rested on one claim, rise and the flood follows, now rose into a sky that offered no such guarantee. 2 millennia of feedback were breaking. The star still burned, rising exactly as it always had, but it had stopped being right, and a religion built on agricultural precision had no theological language for that. In 1353 BCE, the pharaoh Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten and dismantled the Egyptian religious order inside a single reign. He elevated Aten to sole deity, closed every rival temple, and dispatched agents to chisel competing gods' names from stone monuments across Egypt. The Sopdet Isis cult took a direct hit. Priesthoods that had maintained their temples and calendars for generations were disbanded. The observatories went dark. Akhenaten's revolution lasted 17 years. His son Tutankhamun reversed it entirely, restoring Amun, Osiris, and Isis to the state pantheon. When Tutankhamun reversed Akhenaten's revolution, Isis returned to the state pantheon. Sopdet came back with her, because by the new kingdom, Sopdet and Isis were already the same figure. The syncretism had not been interrupted by Atenism. Scholars note that Sopdet's role actually held its ground through the Amarna period, providing the kind of calendrical continuity that even religious upheaval could not afford to discard. The star still predicted the flood. That prediction still mattered. Akhenaten could erase names from stone. He could not erase the Nile's schedule. What the restoration confirmed was simply this: the name that came back was Isis. The older name, Sopdet, had not been destroyed. It had been carried inside the larger story so long that no one needed to retrieve it separately. The star behind that name was older than the dynasty, older than the title, older than the priests, who had long since stopped distinguishing between them. Alexander took Egypt in 332 BCE. The Ptolemaic dynasty absorbed Egyptian religion, renamed it, and exported it. Sopdet became Sothis, a Greek transliteration lodged inside a Greek astronomical framework. The goddess who heralded the flood for 3 millennia reduced to a calendrical data point. Greek scholars absorbed the Sothic cycle into their astronomical catalogues. Ptolemy recorded the 1,461-year drift in the Almagest, not as a sacred obligation requiring priestly vigilance, but as a numerical fact to be noted and filed. The cycle that once commanded temple orientation and royal succession became a data point in a larger mathematical system. Greek astronomy measured it. Roman calendrical reform would eventually supersede it. The reverence that gave the cycle its weight had already been stripped away before the first Greek pen recorded the number. Isis became a universal goddess, her cult spreading from Alexandria across the Mediterranean into Rome, into Greece, into the furthest Hellenistic provinces. The grief-stricken wife whose tears flooded the Nile resonated wherever humans buried their dead. Sopdet survived Akhenaten's purge, survived absorption into Isis, survived Alexander's armies, but each survival cost her something. When Greek scholars filed her rising dates in the library scrolls, the living star cult was already gone. Rome absorbed Egypt in 30 BCE, importing the Julian calendar, built on arithmetic, not on any stars observed rising. The Sothic cycle, 1,361 years of accumulated drift calibrated against a single star, collapsed under one reform decree. 3,000 years of temple astronomy. Rising dates recorded, corridors aligned, New Year fixed to a single star, erased by a calendar Julius Caesar commissioned. By the Roman period, Sopdet's name still appeared in temple inscriptions, carved at Dendera, at Philae, at the last sanctuaries where Egyptian priests maintained the old rites. But those priesthoods were contracting, funding dried up. The temples that had tracked her rising for generations were closing, one by one, under Roman administration. The star that once commanded state calendars and royal succession now appeared only where traditional Egyptian religious practice survived. And that ground was shrinking fast. The name persisted in stone. The living observance behind it did not. Christianity swept through Roman Egypt in a generation. Temples built to catch Sirius's light were sealed, repurposed, or swallowed by silt. In 1822, Champollion deciphered the hieroglyphic script using the Rosetta Stone as his key. The pyramid texts, stone-carved religious writings sealed inside royal burial chambers since 2400 BCE, became readable again for the first time in over 1,000 years. Scholars opened the oldest surviving corpus of Egyptian religious writing and found Sopdet waiting inside. The star that had been absorbed, syncretized, and filed away by Greek astronomers was still named in the oldest sentences human hands had ever cut into granite. The texts had outlasted every institution that once gave them meaning. Scholars found Sopdet's name carved passage after passage through those burial chamber walls, a goddess invisible to the modern world, suddenly reappearing at Egyptian theology's foundation. Egyptologists cross-referenced that record against John Herschel's measurements of Sirius, its brightness, position, and annual rising dates above Egypt. The heliacal rising dates matched Nile flood records with a precision no accident could explain. Priests recorded Sopdet's heliacal rising across Egypt's entire dynastic period, and from the early Old Kingdom through the Ptolemaic era. That span runs roughly 3,000 years. The observations were not continuous in the way a modern logbook is continuous. Dynasties collapsed, temples changed hands, intermediate periods fractured the state entirely, but the recording resumed each time. The star kept rising, the priests kept watching. When Champollion broke the hieroglyphic script in 1822, that accumulated record became readable to the outside world for the first time in more than a millennium. The observations had outlasted every institution that made them. The Sirius cult was not primitive star worship. It was a long-cycle data collection system embedded inside a religion, built to survive dynastic collapse and invasion. Priests maintained Sopdet's rising date records across Egypt's entire dynastic span, observations that resumed after every collapse, every invasion, every interruption. The recording was not seamless. Intermediate periods fractured the state entirely. Temples changed hands, but the practice returned each time. The star kept rising, the priests kept watching. That accumulated record stretched across roughly 3,000 years, and when Champollion broke the hieroglyphic script in 1822, it became readable to the outside world for the first time in more than a millennium. The temples aligned to fractions of a degree. Calendrical records stretched across 1,061-year cycles, an entire agricultural economy synchronized to a single star. That was not mysticism. It was state-level applied science wearing religion as its only surviving institution. Some Egyptologists, cross-referencing the pyramid texts with later astronomical records, argue that Egyptian priests were tracking precession's effects long before Greek astronomers named the phenomenon. They did not have a theory for it. They had the data, rising dates recorded across centuries, showing the star's calendar slipping against the flood cycle. The observation existed. The explanation did not. They kept watching anyway. The Dendera zodiac was carved into a Ptolemaic temple ceiling around 50 BCE. The pyramid texts predate it by roughly 2,350 years. Across that span, from the granite burial chambers of the Old Kingdom To the last Egyptian temple ceiling carved before Rome took the country, priests had been recording star positions. The sky those early priests described was not the sky the Ptolemaic priests looked up at. Precession had been moving the stellar backdrop the entire time. The records, separated by more than 2 millennia, captured 2 different snapshots of the same sky. The gap between those early texts and the later zodiac maps to the same phenomenon, axial precession, Earth's slow rotational wobble tracing a full cycle across roughly 26,000 years. Some researchers argue the Dendera zodiac's constellation placements encode awareness of that drift. Mainstream Egyptologists are skeptical. The shifts could be artistic, symbolic, or simply a design choice. No Egyptian text has been found that names or explains precession as a mechanism. What the records do show is this. Priests across 3,000 years were watching the same sky shift beneath their feet, logging rising dates that no longer match the flood cycle, and keeping the observations anyway. They had the data. They did not have the theory. Researchers found the Dendera zodiac's constellation placements offset from cardinal directions, a shift consistent with precessional movement across centuries of priestly observation. Mainstream Egyptologists stay cautious. The shift may be artistic license or a zodiac design quirk. No text explicitly states Egyptians understood precession's cause. The debate itself reveals something real. 2 sets of records, separated by more than 2,000 years. The pyramid texts, carved around 2400 BCE, describe Sopdet rising in precise relation to the flood season. The Dendera zodiac, cut into a temple ceiling around 50 BCE, shows the same sky, mapped differently. Modern astronomers, running the star positions backward through time, found the gap between those 2 record matches axial precession exactly. The priests did not name what they were seeing. They left the data. The drift is visible only because they never stopped writing it down. If the reading is correct, Egypt did not lose Sopdet because priests failed to watch the sky. They lost her because they watched with extraordinary precision and recorded generation by generation what the star their civilization was built on had become, was no longer where it was supposed to be. Sirius still rises on a clear August morning before dawn. It climbs above Egypt's eastern horizon, exactly as it did for the first pharaohs. Precession has shifted the heliacal rising date by several weeks across 3 millennia. In ancient times, that moment fell in early July. Now it falls in early August. The star has not moved in any meaningful human sense. The calendar beneath it has. Sirius still rises. The temples that tracked her still stand. Stone corridors at Dendera and Philae. Their axes cut to catch the star's first light each July. Precession has shifted the date of the heliacal rising by several weeks across 3 millennia. But the horizon point, the physical location on the skyline where Sirius reappears, has barely moved. Researchers measuring the Dendera alignment found the shift amounts to less than 2 moon diameters over 2,000 years. The stone axes still point at nearly the same place in the sky the builders encoded. What precession dismantled was the calendar. The correspondence between Sirius's rising and the Nile's flood, the tight functional clock that gave Sopdet her authority, that eroded across dynasties. The temples held their aim. The world they were built to measure did not hold still. The star is still there. The architecture still points at it. What no longer exists is the civilization that understood why that mattered. The star and the land have both moved on. One civilization fixed its gaze on a single point of light for 3,000 years. Few came close.